Um, Section Prologue. Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, which is Adrifting, or possibly in the works, potentially as web novel analyst and reviewer. I'm going to gain a little bit more experience, and until I feel like I'm ready for it, maybe I'll change the channel name. But for now, we'll just go with Adrifting. So this section is mostly going to be the prologue. I'm going to ramble about some stuff. I'm going to tell you the outline, and I'll probably put a channel, a chapter, a timestamp, or a footnote in the description, just so that you can skip around a little bit. So yeah, I've written a rough script, and this is going to be run number 3. Approximately each recording is going to take about 2 hours for anyone's interested. Yeah, so we'll start. According to my script, this has been a long time coming. I've always wanted to do a review on this specific book that I'm going on about. It's one of my first favorite ones. It's not one of the first ones I've read, but it's close to the beginning of my first books that I read as a web novel. It's one of the first series that I really enjoyed. And I'll talk quickly a little bit about myself, about how I got here. So I am a person who transitioned from anime to manga to web novels. So yeah, I was originally decently into the anime scene. I found myself wanting more. I just felt like anime it was a bit slow. So then I started to go to the manga, which was quite a quick transition. But yeah, I won't talk too much about the anime stuff. But yeah, I started on Netflix like most things instead of TV, for various reasons. Then I moved on to manga. So I'm from the group of people who still remember when Manga Rock was still quite rampant. As Gray would say, it'd be like the Wild West of the internet, which he termed in one of his Q&As about like how he characterized the Wild West of the internet. Interesting. What that brings to mind is a post by A Small Fiction, who talked about, the final frontiers, and there's always more frontiers. And, we've tamed a frontier of the internet, and there's still plenty more frontiers to discover past space. But that's a little tangent. That's not really relevant to this. But from manga, besides Manga Rock, I mostly spent my time on anime sites like K Anime. I've censored part of that out. But people who know will figure it out. They recently just shut down the Japan or Swedish servers, wherever they're located, and so a lot of people are using manga decks. But I've long moved on from the manga scene, although I still follow any perspective light novels and web novels. So yeah, another quick tangent on terminology. I'm going to be using certain abbreviations, generally JP for Japanese. I think that's the abbreviations they use on NU or somewhere. CN for Chinese and KR for Korean. And just a quick rant on JP stuff and the stuff I'll be reviewing. This probably deserves its own separate video, but that's why I'm putting in the prologue. In my personal opinion, I tend to recommend more Chinese novels just because there's more volumes, and that's the area that I'm more acquainted with. Chinese novels tend to be more on a paid level, the way their web novels payments are structured in contracts. It's more conducive for a certain type of writing that is much more professional than what I find in light novels and web novels, which is light novels and web novels are currently being published for their IPs, their anime works, so there are certain stereotypes that are targeted, especially with the current isekai genre and the previous VR MMO genre. I will get into some of the history of that as well, and I'll be covering it both in this video just because it just made its way in, as well as maybe, hopefully, that'll be put into a history of web novel series. Basically, anything I say that is a tangent that refers to history, I will throw to the history of web novel series, which is on hiatus, and it really just depends on what topics I decide to cover on. But like the genres and whatnot, and shift over time. There was an interesting, realist genre, the mystery genre, and whatnot. But I'm getting too much into it. In terms of that. But back to the thing, to the script I wrote. So I mostly favor Chinese web novels just because that's my area of expertise, and those are the sites I hang out on. Munpia, obviously, the Korean, one of the Korean raw sites, has a very strong system, which makes it very difficult to get translated and read unless you have some sort of unless you have some sort of financial backing. So it's kind of difficult. Not to say that Chinese and Japanese have weaker ones. Japanese is okay. There's much more translation because it's the way they export. But currently Chinese has been most available for the moment, and that's all I'll have to say on that. I have certain plans in the works, but I'm probably going to be sticking to Chinese just because I have more experience with Chinese language and Chinese translation. Very weak, but I do have some background in that. So yeah, that's one of the reasons. And yeah, I just find Chinese to be a little bit more professional. Um, I do have a quick rant on the quality of Japanese novels. And because I wrote it down, I might as well say it. I'm gonna put a quick pause here, and this might go in the BTS audio, which is basically the extraneous audio. But I'm just gonna quickly read it out loud of what I have on my script. So, in my personal opinions, I find that JP novels or Japanese novels are not as high quality as Chinese novels overall, just due to the way and the purpose and the goal of what they're being published for. Both Chinese and Japanese are both built for recreation, but Japanese, I think, either due to various stereotypes or the stuff that's being translated, most of the light novels and web novels are just not up to par or of length of what I'm looking for, right? Even in comparison to Korean ones as well, KR novels, because KR novels, although on the shorter side, they tend to be quite detailed and quite quality, as they say. Korean is surprisingly what I consider quality. Even their webtoons have some that are more on the professional side. Yeah, so but if you compare the low level stuff, what they would call some people would call trash, both Chinese isekai and some of the Chinese stereotypes, racism and nationalism is quite terrible as well. I'm not gonna lie about that, and so is some of the longer titled Japanese isekai and trash level works. It's all difficult, but some people are more mainstream than others, and some people have pointed out the problem with JP isekai is a lot of harem stuff, a lot of unrealistic romances, drama, and wish fulfillment. And Chinese has plenty of that too. Plus, their stereotypes, racism, and whatnot. Because Chinese there's a lot has a stronger national identity. And some would say extremist views, but it has to do with the cultural views and their cultural identity. But overall, the low bar trash is trash, and then you get plenty of that on both stuff. For Chinese, it's more on the wuxia side. For Japanese, it's generally isekai and whatnot. So yeah, that's as much as I'll go into on the low bar stuff. So back to a little bit about my experiences. So some of the first web novels I've read is actually Kuma Kuma Bear, which is a Japanese light novel. It's still pretty good. And Janitor-san is not a hero. That was a very interesting one to be reading as some of the first web novels and starting over. Which was an amazing translation by VG Person. And in my opinion, they're pretty good novels to start out with. They're definitely better ones, but to get into web novels, those are some interesting titles. And then I started to go more in depth into the web novel world, and I stumbled upon Godfather of Champions. I read this, I think, about the time right after Almighty Coach. But this really kicked off a series of works, and some of the first works I read alongside it would be A Valiant Life, The Monk Who Renounced Asceticism, OEM, which stands for Overly Evil Monarch, The Immortal Firmament, so I read Godfather of Champions a little bit after my wuxia phase, or wuxia phase, and JP novels, so I did start out with JP novels, and then, this was also during the time when I just entered, Wuxia world. I never know if it's pronounced Wuxia or Wuxia. English says it should be Wuxia, but Chinese says it's Wuxia. I used to pronounce it Wuxia, but I've since been corrected on that. I Eat Tomatoes is an author. I don't know why he's just so prolific as a Wuxia novel, even though BTTH and ISSTH, I Shall See the Heavens, and Battle Through the Heavens are pretty good. Dualu Dalu, I think it's Dualu. Dalu, I think is what the Chinese title is. 1, 2, and 3 are pretty famous as well. But yeah, those are just some wuxia titles. And this was also still the time when Gravity Tales was still independent, and Myonioni was still around. I don't know why, but Myonioni, KDCS, Kobato Daisuke-chan, Gravity Tales, Wuxia World, Asian Hobbyist is now one of the more recent ones. Whoop reads. Those guys are somehow just I remember them quite well. And Relibrary and Chamber, you could throw those ones in as well. But yeah. So a little bit more on why I decided to do this series. The reason why I was just debating to choose between two of the author's novels. One is The Godfather of Champions, and the other is Winner is King, which I think is 生物魏王. I think it's the pronunciation. I'm kind of going from memory. Actually, give me a quick sec. I'll pull up the pinyin because this is probably not going to be my first reading. So, 胜者为王 is the name of the title. In English, the English machine translation is The Winner is King. Abbreviated TWIK. I'm not going to go more into the title, but yeah, if you're searching for it, the title was The Winner is King. And the reason I've chosen Godfather of Champions is because one of the reasons is I can only do one novel just because time constraints. My time is limited, and I'm choosing this one in particular. And although I wish to cover both, I have other novels on the agenda on the docket. So some of the ones I've planned to do is Cthulhu Gonfalon. Sorry, I always pronounce it wrong because it's always Gonfalon in my mind. Which is the god administrator type character, which is just such an interesting series. I got so many recommendations to that one. The great story and the Korean genre. At time of writing, I was kind of like wandering around. There were some great webtoons I want to cover, but as webtoons I wanted to cover, like Subtle Disaster, The Duty After School. I got to revise my script. The Subtle Disaster, Duty After School, and Sumara. Those are some of the first ones I've read. You've got some American ones like The Purple Heart, Brooklynite, Undead Ed. I'm reciting this from memory. Rebirth. Another great Korean one is Guardians of the Video Game. But then I decided I'd mostly focus on Chinese web novels with that maybe as a side series, or if this ever goes anywhere, I might cover that. Not hardcore, but just as a side series. And then thinking about the Korean series, I was debating what to choose between The Great Storyteller and The Omniscient Reader. I was considering that at time of writing the script, but I found that I chose The Great Storyteller just because it was big in my heart. So those are some of the rational decisions, and I'll only be explaining this in the prologue of this specific review. I'll probably write something else for the other prologues. And then I was also considering Scribble Hub and Royal Road stories just because those communities are big. They've had a big impact on me. There are some very famous and prolific authors, historic ones like Who Cares is pretty big. He wrote the Rewrite series, which I am still enamored by, and I still read from time to time. That's one of the few novels I can reread. Andor is pretty big. You've got Indigo Sharp. He wrote Pitch Black Dreams, I think is the only one he completed, but his writing has really influenced me. Not just on worldview, but just on what a good story is. And then you have plenty of series to talk about, like the Lit RPG series, which was invented, according to Wikipedia and various sources, by Russian authors, but really made its way into American literature and even some Chinese literature, although I don't think Lit RPG has really entered the Chinese literature market. But we'll see, because it's with the whole one-way translation from Chinese to English, but no translation from English to Chinese. We'll see where all the IP stuff goes and whatnot. I won't talk about it here. But yeah, and then the VR MMO, which was a genre at one time, that's still around, but it's kind of waning in favor of the do-over genre. It's the do-over isekai. The do-over genre is very much like the isekai Japanese. But but in terms of which books I'm going to choose, I can only do them one at a time, so I am really getting ahead of myself here. So just one of the last reasons I chose The Godfather of Champions is because I'm still trying to grow this channel over The Winner is King, and the way you're supposed to be reading that, but that consideration came later. I'll discuss that a little later. But yeah, I'm still trying to grow the channel, and I'm going to be choosing some of the more mainstream novels rather than some of the very obscure ones, although, because the first one I covered was an untranslated one. I won't choose like super mainstream ones, so I'm not gonna be doing Release the Witch just because I wasn't too into that series. Just because, yeah. So I'm gonna be choosing some of the ones I feel are more on the mainstream side of things that can be more accepted. Just because I'm just trying to grow the channel, and we're gonna see where I go from there. But I also do want to choose ones that I feel deserve such attention, or just great works in general. I will value ones that are more obscure or just have written it better than mainstream ones, but that's always been in consideration. And so long into the future, I may consider doing like the Omniscient Reader and other series, but I will be doing ones that are just close to my heart and are deserve to be read. So that's really the main criteria. It's more of personal decisions. So yeah, now on to and so a quick blurb on some of the. I will be going more into the background as I will get into the outline, but a quick blurb on the a little bit about Godfather Champions, and it's more of like a future. It's a warning to myself and just future proofing the stuff. Godfather Champions is an amazing. In my personal opinion, Godfather Champions is an amazing book. Due to its proprietary nature, because it's owned by Chidian International, I think is what PR News calls it, and that's what certain sites on Forbes, PR News, which is the UK site, Forbes. I'm trying to think if there's any other site, and I think by themselves it's called Chidian International. There's a whole slew of companies behind it. Could be considered called Cloudberry Holdings. Tencent, Shengda are shareholders. I go a little bit into what I feel it should be called. I go a little bit into the holdings of the company. I did a quick, air quotes, because quick to me means like this. It was quick to me because it was like a 30-minute video. It's still a 30-minute video, but in my opinion, it was just a very, very brief background on the company and some of the research I did. But yeah, in the usage of terminology, I'm mostly going to be calling Chidian is technically should be called Starting Point. That's the machine and actual translation of Chidian. But I feel like Chidian really preserves the Chinese aspect of it. Is Chidian. Chidian. That's the Chinese pronunciation, but Chidian, I'll be using the American pronunciation. So generally, the terminology will be, when I say web novel, it refers to the American site, and Chidian generally refers to the Chinese and raw site. Although I tend to prefer Chidian just because I feel like it gets to the heart of things much easier, and I'm just more familiar just saying it as Chidian. Even on B Station, I think Baidu, not B Station. B Station is Bilibili. On Baidu, it'll also be referred to as Chidian as well. And then I even in that video I didn't cover Chidian, its relationship with Changshi and QQ, but that's stuff that you just dig up on in research. So yeah, so future proofing this, Chidian owns the novel and all associated copyrights, or they have some sort of cooperation agreement with the author, of course. So I wouldn't be surprised if this video gets DMCA takedown or something of the sort, just due to not necessarily hostility, but just unfavorable views. But due to YouTube's fair use laws and just various copyright laws on parody commentary, and with the site's state of video game playthroughs, and even like with Twitch and the video game playthrough copyright situation, means that although I may receive, copyright issues, maybe a copyright strike or a copyright claim, which is all within their rights to do so, I think just due to the stage of this channel, with the state of the channel as it is, and just so now we're gonna get into some of the more interesting stuff. Interesting to me, but maybe boring to you still. We're going to go into the outline. So besides this prologue video, I've got 5, 6, possibly more analysis videos, but mainly another 5 sections that I'm going to be covering, excluding this prologue section, which I just didn't really include. So I'm mostly going to be going to the history and context video, a video on history and context of the book itself, when it was made, how it was made, certain circumstances or things that happened during the time, which just may be of interest to the common reader. I will be going a little bit into the author's background. There are certain considerations that I was not aware of just due to the first work I did. I picked an author that wasn't as well known, so doing an author of this magnitude is really opened my eyes into how much research it takes to actually do something like this, not including the video editing, which just takes forever. These videos just seem to go on and on. A summary section, which seems to be the shortest, but due to the way I structured my first video, or first series, I guess, the summary section tends to, although it tends to be on the shorter side, I tend to do 3 sections, which is in the BTS audio, I include the machine translation, so you can realize how much work goes into translation, the physical translation, and then a personal or raw translation, which I'll keep. I've done my personal, or I've put up my personal translation for because of various factors, and I explain why in that very section. I have included a tags section, which is basically what this novel is about, kind of some of the genres that it falls under and things that it is not. I feel like that's important too, whether to say it is or isn't this type of novel, especially when it comes to nationalism, racism, any traces of that. Romance tags, harem tags. A lot of web novel readers tend to be annoyed by those things that web novel readers tend to be annoyed by. Any suggestions on what tags I should or shouldn't be including would be great. But just know it's a lot of work in general, so I try to do my best there. It's not going to be super comprehensive. It's just as good as it's going to get. And then one of my favorite sections, which is the similar novels and recommendations. I'm a very big list person. I tend to list many things over and over. And I'm not strongly opinionated on things, in my opinion. But I've experienced. Well, no, that's not even true. I've just read a decent amount. And so I like to tend to overshare things and get sidetracked, if you couldn't tell by the prologue already. And I will be gushing a lot over there. So yeah, most of this stuff I just record for those interested. So yeah, that's really the end of the outline. And